The morning sun cast long shadows across the chrome and glass towers of New Geneva, where the Galactic Council held its emergency session. Ambassador Kieran Matthews adjusted his simple black suit and checked his tablet one final time before entering the Grand Assembly Hall. Around him, delegates from 47 different species moved with the careful precision of beings who had learned to navigate centuries of diplomatic protocol. The humans had only been members of the Galactic Council for 12 standard years, and Kieran still felt the weight of that newcomer status every time he walked through these halls. The other species had been traveling between stars when humanity was still figuring out agriculture. They had formed alliances, fought wars, and established trade routes while humans were busy discovering fire. Today felt different, though. The emergency session had been called not by any of the elder species, but by the ethereals, being so ancient that even the oldest council records could only guess at their true age. They rarely involved themselves in galactic politics, preferring to observe from their crystalline cities that drifted through space like floating temples. Kieran took his seat in the human section, a modest cluster of chairs that seemed almost apologetic compared to the elaborate platforms and atmospheric chambers required by other species. To his left, the Zephyrians floated in their pressure-controlled spheres, their tentacles moving in patterns that suggested deep concern. To his right, the Corvani delegation sat in their traditional meditation poses, their scaled features unreadable. The hall fell silent as a shimmering distortion appeared at the center of the chamber. The air itself seemed to bend and twist until a figure materialized, tall, luminous, and unmistakably other. The ethereal representative stood nearly 10 feet tall, its form constantly shifting between states of matter. Sometimes it appeared solid, like carved moonlight, and sometimes it seemed to be made of pure energy that barely contained itself within a vaguely humanoid shape. Honored delegates, the ethereal spoke, and its voice carried across the chamber without need for translation devices. The words formed directly in each listener's mind, arriving with perfect clarity regardless of species or language. We bring urgent warning. A ripple of unease moved through the assembly. The ethereals had not addressed the council directly in over 300 years. For eons beyond your counting, we have watched the dance of civilizations across this galaxy. We have seen species rise and fall, seen wisdom bloom and wither, seen the endless cycle of growth and decay that marks all living things. The being's form pulsed with each word, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Chairman Vexhai of the Centauri Coalition leaned forward on his ornate platform. His forearms gestured in the traditional pose of respectful inquiry. Ancient One, what danger threatens the galaxy that requires such urgent warning? The ethereal turned toward the chairman, and, for a moment its shifting features almost seemed to settle into something resembling a face. The danger comes not from outside forces, but from within. There is a species among you that walks a path we have seen before. A species that stands at the crossroads between transcendence and catastrophe. Kieran felt his stomach clench. He didn't need to be a diplomat to guess where this was heading. The humans, several delegates whispered in their various languages, the translation devices creating a chorus of concern that echoed through the chamber. The ethereal's attention shifted, and, suddenly, Kieran felt as if those impossible eyes were looking directly into his soul. Indeed. The youngest members of your council have reached a critical juncture. Their development follows patterns we have witnessed 12 times before in our long existence. 12 times? This from Ambassador Thyra of the Jovian Protectorate, her voice tight with worry. What happened to those other species? The ethereal was silent for a long moment, its form dimming until it was barely visible. When it spoke again, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Of the 12 species that followed this path, 11 chose the way of conquest. They became devourers of worlds, consumers of civilizations. They spread across the galaxy like a plague, turning everything they touched into extensions of themselves. In the end, we were forced to intervene. The silence that followed was deafening. Kieran found himself gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with tension. The implications were clear: 11 civilizations had been wiped out by these ancient beings. And the 12th? Chairman Vexhai asked, though his voice suggested he dreaded the answer. The 12th chose differently. They achieved transcendence, becoming something greater than they had been. They joined us in the realm beyond physical existence, helping to guide younger species toward wisdom. The ethereal's form brightened again, but the light seemed cold and distant. But their path to transcendence required the sacrifice of their physical forms. They abandoned their bodies, their planets, their entire material civilization to become beings of pure consciousness. Kieran stood up slowly, his mind racing. With respect, Ancient One, what exactly are you warning us about? What pattern do you see in humanity that concerns you? The ethereal turned its full attention to him, and Kieran felt as if he was being examined on a molecular level. Your species displays the 3 markers that have appeared in all 13 cases. First, rapid technological advancement that outpaces wisdom. Second, an insatiable curiosity that drives you to explore and expand beyond all reasonable limits. Third, and most dangerous, an absolute refusal to accept limitation or defeat. Those sound like positive traits, Kieran said carefully. They can be. Or they can be the seeds of galactic destruction. The ethereal's voice carried a weight of infinite sadness. Your species has achieved interstellar travel in less time than most civilizations spend developing written language. You have established colonies on dozens of worlds in just over a decade. Your population grows exponentially, and your resource consumption increases even faster. Ambassador Corvette of the Trade Federation spoke up, her crystalline features reflecting the strange light from the ethereal. The humans have been model members of the Council. They have honored all treaties and trade agreements. Their expansion has been peaceful. So it was with the others, at first, the ethereal replied. Peaceful expansion, model citizenship, respect for established law. Until the moment when their needs outgrew the Council's ability to accommodate them. Until the moment when they decided that the old ways were inefficient obstacles to their destiny. The hall erupted in concerned murmurs as delegates turned to each other in worried conference. Kieran remained standing, his mind working furiously to process this revelation. What would you have us do? He asked. How do we avoid this fate? The ethereal moved closer, its presence filling the space between them with an almost overwhelming sense of ancient power. That choice belongs to your species alone. We cannot and will not make it for you. But we offer this warning: tread carefully upon the world. The path before you splits in 2 directions, and both lead to the end of humanity as you know it. You're saying we either become monsters that you'll have to destroy, or we abandon our physical existence entirely? Kieran's voice carried a note of disbelief. There's no third option? In our observation of 13 species across millions of years, no third path has ever been found. The ethereal's form began to fade at the edges, as if it was preparing to depart. But your species has surprised us before. Perhaps you will surprise us again. Chairman Vexhai called for order as the delegates' discussions grew more heated. Ancient One, how much time do we have? When will this critical moment arrive? The ethereal paused in its departure, its form stabilizing for a moment. The pattern suggests you have perhaps 50 of your years before the choice becomes unavoidable. But patterns can accelerate. We have observed your species' tendency to compress normal developmental timelines. It could be much sooner. And you'll be watching? Kieran asked. We are always watching. The being's voice grew distant, as if it was speaking from across vast cosmic distances. But we will not interfere until the moment of choice arrives. The decision must be yours alone, made with full knowledge of the consequences. The ethereal began to dissolve, its form breaking apart like mist in a strong wind. Just before it vanished completely, it spoke one final time. Remember, young species, power without wisdom is the shortest path to extinction. But wisdom without power is the longest path to irrelevance. The challenge is finding the balance between them. And then, it was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and the weight of impossible choices. The assembly hall remained silent for a full minute before Chairman Vexhai called for a formal recess. As delegates began to file out in small groups, Kieran noticed the way they looked at him and his human colleagues. Where before there had been polite acceptance, now he saw wariness, calculation, and, in some cases, outright fear. Ambassador Thyra approached him as he gathered his things. Kieran, I want you to know that whatever happens, the Jovian Protectorate values our alliance with humanity. We don't believe you're destined to become the monsters that being described. Thank you, Thyra. That means more than you know. Kieran shook her hand, noting how her three-fingered grip seemed less firm than usual. Even those who supported humanity were now uncertain. As he made his way through the corridors toward the communication center, Kieran's mind raced with the implications of what he'd just heard. He had to contact Earth immediately, had to warn the government about what was coming. But, how do you tell an entire species that they might be destined for extinction or transcendence, with no middle ground? The communication center was a marvel of galactic technology, allowing near-instantaneous contact across thousands of light-years. Kieran activated the secured channel to Earth and waited as the connection stabilized. Within moments, he was looking at the familiar face of Secretary General Elena Vasquez, her expression immediately shifting to concern when she saw his troubled features. Kieran, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's happening? Elena, I need you to call an emergency session of the Security Council. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but you need to understand that this is a matter of species survival. He spent the next hour explaining everything: the ethereal swarming, the historical pattern of the 13 species, the choice between transcendence and destruction. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each revelation. So we have 50 years to either evolve beyond physical existence or become galactic conquerors who will be wiped out by beings we can't even comprehend? Elena's voice was carefully controlled, but Kieran could hear the strain underneath. That's the pattern they've observed. But they also said we might surprise them. We've surprised ourselves before. Indeed we have. Elena was quiet for a moment, staring at something off-screen. Kieran, I want you to stay at the council and monitor the situation. Find out how the other species are reacting to this news. Are they going to try to contain us? Isolate us? Or worse? I'll do what I can. But, Elena, there's something else. The way the other delegates looked at me after the ethereal left. I think some of them are already making contingency plans. Elena nodded grimly. I was afraid of that. We'll need to be very careful about how we handle this. Any sign of aggressive expansion or military buildup could be interpreted as confirmation of the ethereal's warning. After ending the transmission, Kieran sat alone in the communication center, staring out at the stars visible through the transparent aluminum windows. Somewhere out there, humanity was spread across dozens of worlds, pushing ever outward in their quest to explore and grow. It was what made them human, that irrepressible drive to see what lay beyond the next horizon. But, according to a being older than recorded history, that same drive had doomed 11 other species to extinction. The question that haunted him was simple: could humanity change its fundamental nature without ceasing to be human? The days following the ethereal's warning were filled with careful diplomacy and cautious conversations. Kieran attended numerous informal gatherings, trying to gauge the council's mood and assess the potential threats to humanity's position. What he discovered was both better and worse than he'd feared. The elder species, the Centauri, the Jovians, the Altarians, were concerned but not panicking. They had dealt with existential threats before and understood the value of measured responses. But some of the younger species, those who had joined the council only a few centuries before humanity, were openly discussing the possibility of preemptive action. If the pattern is as certain as the ethereal claims, Ambassador Dexron of the Hegemony argued during one particularly tense informal session, then, waiting 50 years simply gives them time to become too powerful to stop. You're talking about genocide, Kieran replied, keeping his voice level despite the fury building inside him. Destroying an entire species based on a prediction about what they might become. I'm talking about preservation of galactic civilization, Dexron shot back. The ethereal said 11 species followed this path to destruction. 11 entire civilizations were wiped out because they were allowed to reach the tipping point. Ambassador Corvette raised one of her crystalline hands for attention. Perhaps there is a middle path. The humans could be isolated, contained within their current territory. Given time to mature without the opportunity for dangerous expansion. Contained? Kieran felt his diplomatic training slipping away. You mean imprisoned? Turned into a galactic curiosity for others to study and manage. Better imprisoned than extinct, Dexron muttered. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Chairman Vexhai himself entered the informal gathering chamber, his forearms moving in gestures that suggested urgent business. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the senior delegate. I apologize for the interruption, but there has been a development. Vexhai's usually calm demeanor showed cracks of concern. We have received another communication from the Ethereals. They wish to clarify certain aspects of their warning. The shimmer of materialization began at the center of the chamber, and, once again, an ethereal representative took form. This time, however, the being appeared different, smaller, more solid, with features that seemed almost familiar in their arrangement. I am Kethvar, speaker for the Ethereal Collective, the being announced. I come to address the concerns and misconceptions that have arisen from our warning. Dexron was the first to speak. Ancient One, if the pattern is as inevitable as your colleague suggested, surely the logical response is early intervention. Kethvar turned toward the hegemony representative, and Kieran could sense disapproval radiating from the ancient being. The logical response is wisdom, not fear. We did not issue our warning so that you might repeat the mistakes we have seen before. What mistakes? Chairman Vexhai asked. Fear-driven isolation. Preemptive violence. The assumption that potential must become reality. Kethvar's form brightened with what might have been anger. 3 of the 11 species we were forced to eliminate became threats not because of their inherent nature, but because they were driven to extremism by the fear and hostility of their neighbors. The silence that followed was profound. Kieran felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. You're saying that some of those civilizations became threats because other species tried to contain them? Precisely. When a species with unlimited potential is told that they must accept limits, when they are treated as threats because of what they might become rather than what they are, the results are often predictable. Kethvar moved closer to the assembled delegates. Fear creates the very monsters it seeks to prevent. Ambassador Thyra leaned forward in her chair. Then, what would you have us do? Ignore the warning entirely? Learn from it. Watch for the signs that distinguish transcendence from conquest. Support the humans in making the right choice rather than forcing them into the wrong one. The ethereal's attention turned to Kieran. Your species stands at a crossroads, but the path you choose will be influenced by how you are treated by those around you. Isolation breeds desperation. Hostility breeds aggression. But cooperation and support can nurture wisdom. Kieran stood, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. Ancient One, what were the signs that distinguished the species that achieved transcendence from those that chose conquest? Kethvar was silent for a long moment, its form dimming and brightening in what might have been deep thought. The difference lay in how they responded to limitation. The ones who achieved transcendence learned to find infinite growth within finite boundaries. They turned their expansion inward, exploring the depths of consciousness and possibility rather than simply consuming more territory and resources. And the others? The others believed that external growth was the only true growth. They consumed because they confused expansion with evolution, conquest with progress. The being's voice carried infinite sadness. They never learned that true power comes from understanding, not domination. Chairman Vexhai raised all 4 of his arms in a gesture of formal inquiry. How can we help guide humanity toward transcendence rather than conquest? By offering challenges that can be met through wisdom rather than force. By presenting problems that cannot be solved through expansion or consumption. By showing them that there are frontiers within the mind and spirit that are more vast than any physical territory. Kethvar began to fade around the edges. And, most importantly, by treating them as potential partners in transcendence rather than inevitable threats to be managed. As the ethereal prepared to depart, Kieran called out one final question. Will you help us? Will you guide us through this transition? The ancient being paused in its dissolution. We cannot walk the path for you. But we will not abandon you to walk it alone. When the time comes for your species to choose, we will be there to offer what wisdom we can." And then, it was gone, leaving the assembled delegates to contemplate the magnitude of the task before them. The weeks that followed saw a subtle but significant shift in the galactic political landscape. The fear-driven calls for isolation and containment gradually gave way to more thoughtful discussions about how to support humanity's development. Species that had never shown interest in human affairs suddenly began proposing joint research projects and cultural exchanges. But Kieran could see the underlying tension that still existed. For every species that genuinely wanted to help, there was another that was simply trying to monitor human development more closely. The galaxy was watching humanity with an intensity that felt both supportive and suffocating. The real test came when Earth announced the launch of the Deep Horizon Project, humanity's most ambitious exploration initiative to date. The plan called for sending colony ships beyond the current bounds of galactic civilization, into the dark regions where no species had ever ventured. The announcement triggered immediate controversy in the Council. Some saw it as exactly the kind of unlimited expansion that the Ethereal had warned against. Others argued that exploring unknown regions was different from conquering inhabited systems. Kieran found himself at the center of the debate, trying to explain humanity's motivations while addressing legitimate concerns about the precedent being set. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's greatest strength, their drive to explore and expand, was also their greatest vulnerability. As he prepared for another day of intense negotiations, Kieran reflected on the impossible position his species had been placed in. They were being asked to change their fundamental nature based on the experiences of civilizations they'd never heard of, guided by beings whose true motivations remained mysterious. But perhaps that was exactly the kind of challenge that Kethvar had described, a problem that couldn't be solved through force or expansion, but only through wisdom and understanding. The question was whether humanity could learn to find infinite growth within finite boundaries before their 50 years ran out. Dr. Sarachan stared at the holographic display floating above her laboratory table, watching streams of data flow like digital waterfalls across the three-dimensional interface. Each column of numbers represented months of research, years of theoretical work, and the hopes of an entire species trying to understand its own destiny. The Consciousness Mapping Project had begun 18 months ago, shortly after Ambassador Matthews had transmitted the Ethereal's warning to Earth. If humanity was going to transcend physical existence, they needed to understand consciousness itself, what it was, how it worked, and whether it could truly exist independent of biological neural networks. "Sarah, we're getting some unusual readings from the quantum resonance chamber," called Dr. James Okafor from across the lab. His dark face was illuminated by the glow from his workstation, where complex mathematical equations scrolled past at inhuman speed. "The test subjects are showing synchronized brainwave patterns that shouldn't be possible at this distance." Sarah walked over to examine his data, her footsteps echoing in the vast underground facility that had been built specifically for this research. The lab was located 3 miles beneath the Atacama Desert, shielded from electromagnetic interference and isolated from the rest of human civilization. If consciousness could exist beyond the physical, this was where they would find proof. "How far apart are the subjects?" she asked, studying the synchronized patterns with growing excitement. 47 miles. "We have teams stationed at research posts across the desert, all connected through quantum-entangled monitoring devices. When Subject 7 in post-alpha enters a meditative state, Subject 12 in post-delta shows identical brain patterns within nanoseconds." Sarah felt her heart race. After 18 months of painstaking research, they might finally have evidence that consciousness could transcend physical boundaries. "Have you ruled out all possible conventional explanations?" "Everything we can think of. No electromagnetic communication, no chemical signals, no physical contact between the subjects for over 6 months. The only connection is through quantum entanglement, and even that shouldn't allow for information transfer according to traditional physics." "But consciousness isn't traditional physics," Sarah murmured, her mind racing through the implications. "James, I want you to expand the experiment. Get subjects at research stations on Luna and Mars. If consciousness can bridge interplanetary distances, you think we're actually documenting the first stages of transcendence?" James's voice carried a mixture of excitement and fear. Before Sarah could answer, her communicator chimed with an urgent message from the surface. Dr. Chen, we have visitors. A council delegation has arrived requesting immediate consultation. Sarah exchanged glances with James. Official council visits to classified human research facilities were unprecedented. Either their work had attracted attention from across the galaxy, or something significant had happened in the broader political arena. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the facility's main conference room, facing a diverse group of alien delegates led by someone she recognized from news broadcasts, Ambassador Thyra of the Jovian Protectorate. Beside her sat being Sarah had only seen in textbooks, a crystalline Corvani whose faceted features reflected the room's lighting in complex patterns, a floating Zephyrian whose tentacles moved in what she guessed were linguistic gestures, and, most surprisingly, a figure that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Thyra began, her voice carrying formal diplomatic precision, "Thank you for agreeing to this emergency consultation. I believe you know why we're here." "I assume it has something to do with our consciousness research," Sarah replied carefully. "Though I'm not sure how classified human projects became council business." The shimmering figure spoke, and Sarah felt the words formed directly in her mind. "Because your research may be the key to avoiding galactic catastrophe." Sarah's breath caught. An ethereal. Here, in her laboratory, speaking to her directly. "Ancient One, I'm honored by your presence, but I don't understand how our work could have such implications." "Show me what you have discovered," the ethereal replied. "Your species' time grows shorter than we originally calculated." The next hour passed in a blur of technical presentations and, increasingly impossible data. Sarah showed them the synchronized consciousness experiments, the quantum resonance findings, and, most significantly, the preliminary results from their attempts to sustain consciousness in artificial quantum matrices. The test subjects report complete retention of memory and personality while their consciousness operates within the quantum substrate, Sarah explained, manipulating the holographic display to show neural activity patterns. For brief periods, they seem to exist in a state that's neither fully physical nor entirely digital. The ethereal's form brightened noticeably. "You have achieved in 18 months what took the transcended species nearly a century to discover. Is that good or bad?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Both," Ambassador Thyra interjected grimly. "We've received intelligence that certain council factions are preparing to act against humanity. They believe your rapid progress confirms the ethereal's warning about accelerated timelines." The Corvani delegate spoke for the first time, its crystalline voice like the sound of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The hegemony has convinced 17 species to support immediate intervention. They argue that humanity's advancement has exceeded all predicted parameters." Sarah felt the weight of unimaginable pressure settling on her shoulders. "What kind of intervention?" "Quarantine initially," the Zephyrian replied through its translation device. "Isolation of all human worlds while the Council debates long-term solutions. But there are voices calling for more permanent measures." "Genocide," Sarah said flatly. "Prevention of galactic extinction," the Corvani corrected, though not unkindly. From their perspective, allowing humanity to continue unchecked development risks the destruction of all galactic civilization. The ethereal moved closer to Sarah, its presence filling the room with an almost overwhelming sense of ancient wisdom and power. "There is another path. Your research suggests that voluntary transcendence may be possible much sooner than we anticipated. If humanity could demonstrate successful consciousness transfer within the next few years rather than decades, the Council would see it as proof that we're choosing transcendence over conquest," Sarah finished. "But, you're talking about asking our entire species to abandon physical existence based on preliminary research." "Not abandon," the ethereal corrected. "Evolve." The transcended species did not lose their essential nature, they became more than they had been while retaining what made them unique. Sarah looked around the room at the assembled delegates, seeing hope and fear in equal measure on their alien features. "What you're proposing, it would require convincing billions of people to take the ultimate leap of faith. To trust in technology that we barely understand ourselves." The alternative, Ambassador Thyra said quietly, may be no choice at all. Over the following days, Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity that stretched across multiple worlds and involved resources she had never dreamed of accessing. The Council's moderate factions had agreed to support an accelerated transcendence project, providing alien technology and expertise that advanced human understanding by centuries in mere weeks. The quantum consciousness matrices that had been Sarah's life's work suddenly became fusion hybrids incorporating Eltarian dimensional folding, Centauri temporal stabilization, and, most remarkably, ethereal consciousness archaeology techniques for preserving the essential patterns that made each individual unique. It's like building a bridge across an ocean when you're not even sure the other side exists, Dr. Okafor observed as they watched teams of human and alien scientists working together in the expanded laboratory complex. Except the ocean is the gap between physical and pure consciousness, and falling in means either transcendence or death, Sarah added, studying readouts from the latest test runs. No pressure at all. Their first major breakthrough came when they successfully maintained a volunteer's consciousness in the quantum matrix for over 72 hours. Captain Elena Rodriguez, a veteran space explorer who had volunteered for the most dangerous phase of testing, emerged from the experience with reports that defied conventional understanding. It wasn't like losing my body, she explained to Sarah and the assembled research team. It was like discovering that my body had always been just one small part of what I really was. I could perceive dimensions of reality that don't exist in normal spacetime. I could sense the consciousness patterns of other beings across vast distances. Any negative effects? Sarah asked, running detailed scans of Elena's neural activity. The opposite. I feel more aware, more alive than I ever have. But... Elena paused, struggling to find words for an experience that human language wasn't equipped to describe. I could also sense something else. A darkness at the edges of galactic consciousness. Something that the ethereals are genuinely afraid of. Sarah exchanged glances with the ethereal observer who had been present for all major experiments. Ancient One, what is Captain Rodriguez detecting? The ethereal's form dimmed noticeably. The reason we have intervened in galactic development for so long. There are forces beyond this galaxy, entities that view consciousness itself as a threat to be eliminated. The transcended species help us maintain barriers that keep these forces at bay. You're recruiting us, Sarah realized. This isn't just about preventing humanity from becoming galactic conquerors. You need us to join some kind of cosmic defense force. The choice remains yours, the ethereal replied. But understand that isolation is not truly an option. Either humanity transcends and joins the greater community of consciousness, or it remains physical and eventually faces the choice between conquest and extinction. As word of the successful consciousness transfer spread through the human colonies, reactions were swift and predictably divided. Some hailed it as the next stage of human evolution, the fulfillment of humanity's destiny among the stars. Others saw it as the ultimate betrayal of human nature, a surrender of everything that made this species unique. The debate played out across every major media platform, in government assemblies, and around family dinner tables throughout human space. Religious leaders struggled to determine whether consciousness transfer was a step toward divine union or spiritual suicide. Scientists argued about the implications of abandoning billions of years of biological evolution. Philosophers questioned whether a transferred consciousness would truly be the same person or simply a copy with identical memories. Sarah found herself thrust into the role of humanity's primary advocate for transcendence, appearing before committees, councils, and interview panels to explain the science and defend the choice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her career studying consciousness, but now she was being asked to convince an entire species to redefine what consciousness meant. The question isn't whether we'll remain human, she told the Global Assembly during one particularly heated session. The question is what humanity becomes. Do we choose to grow beyond our current limitations, or do we allow those limitations to define our ultimate boundaries? The opposition was fierce and well-organized. A coalition calling itself Humanity First had formed around the argument that transcendence was indistinguishable from species suicide. Their leader, Dr. Marcus Webb, ironically, one of Sarah's former colleagues, became the most recognizable face of resistance to the Transcendence Project. They're asking us to trust our entire future to alien technology and the promises of beings we don't understand, Webb declared during a public debate with Sarah. What guarantee do we have that consciousness transfer preserves anything meaningful about human nature? What evidence do we have that the transcended species are truly alive in any sense we would recognize? It was a fair question, and one that Sarah struggled to answer definitively. The truth was that consciousness remained one of the universe's deepest mysteries, even with all the advances they had made. They could transfer consciousness, maintain it in quantum substrates, and even enhance it beyond biological limitations, but they couldn't prove that the result was truly the same person who had entered the process. The debate took on new urgency when Ambassador Matthews transmitted intelligence from New Geneva about the Council's growing impatience. The coalition favoring immediate action against humanity had grown to include 23 species, just 4 votes short of the majority needed to authorize quarantine measures. We have perhaps 6 months before the Council acts, Matthews reported during a secure communication to Earth's leadership. The moderate factions are doing everything they can to delay action, but they need concrete evidence that humanity is choosing transcendence over conquest. Sarah stared at the quantum consciousness matrices that filled her laboratory, each one representing months of research and the hopes of billions of people. 6 months to convince an entire species to abandon everything they had ever known. 6 months to prove that transcendence was possible, desirable, and safe. 6 months to redefine what it meant to be human. James, she called to her colleague, who was monitoring the latest test runs. What's our current success rate for consciousness transfer? 97% for temporary transfers, 86% for extended periods over a week, he replied without looking up from his instruments. Still working on the permanent transition protocols. And the volunteers? We have over 1,000 people signed up for the final trials, including some prominent figures from government and academia. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Mars Colony Administration volunteered yesterday. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and terror at the courage of her fellow humans. They were literally volunteering to be the first to cross the threshold between physical and transcendent existence, knowing that there might be no way back. The final phase of testing began 3 months later, with volunteers undergoing permanent consciousness transfer to specially designed quantum substrates that could support transcendent awareness indefinitely. The process was remarkably similar to the temporary transfers, except for the irreversible shutdown of biological neural activity. Sarah watched Dr. Tanaka undergo the procedure, monitoring her vital signs as her brain activity gradually shifted from biological neurons to quantum patterns. For several minutes, the scientist existed in both states simultaneously, her physical brain maintaining minimal function while her consciousness established itself in the quantum matrix. Then, with a gentle sigh, Dr. Tanaka's biological functions ceased. Her body lay peaceful and still while her consciousness blazed with new intensity in the quantum substrate. Yuki? Sarah called softly. Can you hear me? The response came not through speakers but directly into Sarah's mind, just as communications from ethereals had. I hear you, Sarah. But, more than that, I understand you in ways I never could before. How do you feel? I feel expanded. Like I've been living in a single room my entire life and, suddenly, discovered that the house has countless other rooms, each containing wonders I never imagined. Dr. Tanaka's consciousness patterns pulsed with what could only be described as joy. I'm still myself, still human, but I'm more than I was. Over the following weeks, the first generation of transcended humans began to explore their new existence. They maintained contact with the physical world through quantum communication systems, but also began to perceive reality on levels that biological consciousness couldn't access. They could sense the consciousness patterns of other beings across interstellar distances, commune directly with the ethereals and other transcended species, and, most remarkably, they began to understand the cosmic threats that had motivated the ethereals' intervention in galactic affairs. There are intelligences in the void between galaxies, Dr. Tanaka reported during one of her communications with the research team. Entities that view organized consciousness as an infection to be cleansed. The transcended species form a network of awareness that helps protect all physical life from these forces. Sarah felt a chill that went beyond physical sensation. Are you saying that transcendence isn't just evolution, it's conscription into a cosmic war? Not conscription. Voluntary service in the defense of all life and consciousness. The alternative is to remain vulnerable to forces that view biological and digital consciousness as equally threatening. As news of successful permanent transcendence spread throughout human space, the species found itself facing the ultimate decision point. The Council had agreed to delay action for 1 year, giving humanity time to demonstrate their choice through voluntary transcendence rates. The target was ambitious: 10% of the human population needed to choose transcendence within 12 months to convince the Council that humanity was genuinely committed to the path of evolution rather than conquest. Sarah stood in her laboratory, now expanded to include transcendence chambers on dozens of worlds, and watched as thousands of humans made the choice to leave their physical existence behind. Each one emerged from the process changed but recognizably themselves, joining a growing network of transcended consciousness that spanned the galaxy. But, for every person who chose transcendence, there were dozens who remained firmly committed to physical existence. The species was literally splitting in two, with transcended and physical humans developing increasingly different perspectives on reality, purpose, and the future. The question that haunted Sarah was whether this division represented evolution or fragmentation. Were they witnessing the next stage of human development, or the beginning of the end of humanity as a unified species? As the deadline approached and the Council prepared to make its final judgment, Sarah realized that the choice facing humanity was more complex than anyone had imagined. They weren't just choosing between transcendence and conquest, they were choosing what it meant to be human in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than they had ever dreamed. The Great Assembly Hall of New Geneva had never seen anything like this before. Where once the human delegation had consisted of a handful of ambassadors sitting in modest chairs, now the space buzzed with an impossible mixture of physical and transcendent presence. Ambassador Matthews still occupied his traditional seat, but around him flickered the quantum patterns of dozens of transcended humans whose consciousness manifested as shimmering forms of pure awareness. Sarah Chen existed in both states simultaneously, her physical body seated in the observer's section while her transcended consciousness extended throughout the chamber, sensing the emotional currents and hidden thoughts of every delegate present. The dual perspective was disorienting but invaluable, allowing her to perceive the political situation with unprecedented clarity. 12 months had passed since the Council's ultimatum. The results were both remarkable and troubling. 847 million humans had chosen transcendence, representing approximately 8% of the species' total population. Close to the target, but not quite enough to satisfy the more cautious Council members. Chairman Vexhai called the session to order, his forearms moving in the formal gestures that marked momentous occasions. We gather today to address the question that has dominated galactic politics for the past year: has humanity demonstrated a genuine commitment to transcendence over conquest? The statistics holographic display showed the numbers that would determine humanity's fate. 8% transcended, with transcendence rates varying dramatically between different human colonies. Earth itself showed only a 3% transcendence rate, while the outer frontier worlds reached as high as 15% in some cases. Ambassador Dexron of the Hegemony spoke first, his reptilian features set in an expression of grim determination. The numbers speak for themselves. Less than 1 in 10 humans has chosen transcendence. The vast majority remains committed to physical existence and continued expansion. This proves that humanity as a species has not genuinely embraced the path of evolution. 800 million transcended humans represent a larger population than most entire species, Matthews countered. The transcendence movement continues to grow exponentially. Given more time. Time we may not have, interrupted Ambassador Corvette of the Trade Federation. Her crystalline features reflected the chamber's lights and patterns that suggested deep concern. Our monitoring stations report that human expansion has actually accelerated during the past year. New colonies are being established at unprecedented rates. Sarah felt her dual consciousness analyzing the political currents in the room. Fear dominated the emotional landscape, fear that humanity would become the galaxy-consuming threat that the ethereals had warned about, but also fear of the precedent that would be set by taking preemptive action against a species that had committed no crimes. The ethereal representative materialized at the center of the chamber, its form more solid and defined than Sarah had ever seen before. This wasn't Kethvar or any of the previous speakers, but someone new, someone whose presence carried such weight that even the transcended humans felt awed by its proximity. "I am Zarathel, first speaker of the ethereal collective," the being announced, its voice creating ripples in the quantum field that the transcended humans could perceive directly. "I come to offer final wisdom before the council makes its decision." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah could sense that even the most militant delegates recognized the significance of having the ethereal's highest authority address the council directly. "The question before you is not whether humanity has achieved the target percentage of transcendence," Zarathel continued. "The question is whether they have demonstrated the wisdom to choose their own path forward." Chairman Vexhai leaned forward on his platform. "Ancient One, what wisdom have you observed?" Zarathel's form shifted, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with images, holographic representations that seemed to bypass visual perception and appear directly in each observer's mind. They showed human colonies scattered across dozens of worlds, but not the aggressive expansion that some delegates feared. Instead, Sarah saw communities working to terraform barren worlds, research stations pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge, and, most remarkably, transcended and physical humans working together in ways that no other species had achieved. "Observe their colonies on Kepler 442b, Zarathel said, the images shifting to show a world that had been a lifeless rock 5 years earlier. Physical humans provide the labor and material resources needed for terraforming, while transcended humans contribute consciousness-level environmental manipulation that accelerates the process by centuries." Sarah watched in amazement as the images showed transcended human consciousness directing weather patterns, influencing plant growth at the cellular level, and even guiding geological processes to create optimal conditions for life. It was collaboration between physical and transcendent existence that went far beyond what the research teams had imagined. "Look at their response to the Zeta Reticuli crisis," the ethereal continued, showing images of a human colony world that had faced catastrophic volcanic activity 3 months earlier. Rather than abandoning the colony, they developed new forms of disaster response that combined physical engineering with consciousness-level geological stabilization. The images showed something unprecedented: transcended humans literally holding the planet's tectonic plates in stable configuration while physical humans constructed permanent solutions to prevent future catastrophes. It was the kind of large-scale environmental manipulation that required both physical presence and transcendent awareness. Most significantly, Zarathel said, and the images shifted to show the quantum communication networks that now connected every human colony. Observe how they have chosen to maintain unity despite their division. Sarah felt a surge of pride as the true scope of humanity's achievement became clear. The transcended and physical human populations hadn't split into separate species, they had become complementary aspects of a unified civilization that was greater than the sum of its parts. Ambassador Thyra spoke up, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "They've found a third path. Not full transcendence or continued physical existence, but synthesis." "Indeed," Zarathel confirmed. "In our observation of countless civilizations across millions of years, we have never witnessed a species achieve stable integration between transcendent and physical consciousness. The others either chose one path or the other, never both." The revelation sent ripples of amazement through the assembly. Sarah could sense minds being changed as delegates realized they were witnessing something genuinely unprecedented in galactic history. But Dexron wasn't convinced. "This synthesis you describe, how do we know it's stable? How do we know the physical humans won't eventually dominate and return to the path of conquest?" Sarah felt her transcended consciousness touch the quantum patterns of her transcended colleagues, and together they decided to demonstrate something that would settle the question once and for all. With Matthew's permission, they began to manifest their presence more fully in the physical chamber. The effect was subtle at first, a gentle brightening of the air around the human delegation, a sense of expansion that seemed to make the space larger than its actual dimensions. Then, gradually, the assembled delegates began to perceive what the transcended humans could see, the true scope of galactic consciousness. Every sentient being in the chamber appeared surrounded by patterns of awareness that extended far beyond their physical forms. The ethereals blazed like stars, their consciousness spanning vast regions of spacetime. The other species showed more modest but still significant extensions of awareness beyond their biological boundaries. But the humans, both physical and transcended, showed something unique. Their consciousness patterns were interconnected in ways that created a network effect, each individual awareness enhanced by its connection to the greater whole. By the makers, breathed Ambassador Corvette, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics that suggested awe. They're not becoming transcendent or remaining physical, they're becoming something entirely new. Sarah felt the moment when understanding clicked across the chamber. The delegates weren't just seeing a new form of consciousness, they were experiencing it, feeling how the synthesis of physical and transcendent awareness created possibilities that neither could achieve alone. Zarathel's form brightened with what could only be described as satisfaction. This is why we warned rather than simply observing. This is why we chose to reveal patterns we had never shared before. Humanity has achieved something that even we thought impossible, they have found a way to evolve without abandoning their essential nature. The demonstration lasted only a few minutes, but its impact was profound. When the transcended humans withdrew their extended consciousness, the chamber felt smaller, diminished, as if something vital had been removed from the environment. Chairman Vexhai called for a formal recess to allow the council members to consider what they had witnessed. As delegates filed out in small groups, Sarah noticed that the conversations had shifted dramatically. Where before there had been debate about containing or eliminating a threat, now there was discussion about what this new form of consciousness might mean for galactic civilization. During the recess, Sarah found herself approached by delegates from species she had never expected to show interest in humanity. The Altarians, known for their obsession with temporal mechanics, wanted to understand how consciousness could exist simultaneously in physical and quantum states. The Jovians were fascinated by the implications for their own long-term development as a species. Most surprisingly, Ambassador Dexron himself requested a private conference with Sarah and Matthews. "I owe your species an apology," the hegemony representative said, his usual hostility replaced by something approaching humility. "I allowed fear to blind me to possibilities I had never imagined. What you've achieved, it changes everything." "How so?" Matthews asked. "Because you've proven that the ethereal's pattern isn't absolute. You found a fourth outcome, neither conquest nor transcendence nor destruction, but synthesis." Dexron's reptilian features showed an expression that might have been hope. "If humanity can achieve this, perhaps other species can as well. Perhaps we all have the potential to become more than we are without losing what makes us unique." When the session reconvened, the mood in the chamber had shifted so dramatically that Sarah could sense it even without her transcended awareness. The question was no longer whether humanity posed a threat, but whether they could help other species achieve similar synthesis. Chairman Vexhai called for formal statements from each major faction. One by one, the species that had previously called for immediate action against humanity now spoke of partnership, collaboration, and the possibility of guided evolution for all galactic civilizations. "The hegemony withdraws its call for quarantine measures," Dexron announced. "Instead, we propose that humanity be invited to share their synthesis techniques with any species that chooses to pursue similar development." The Jovian Protectorate, the Trade Federation, and even some of the more conservative elder species quickly followed suit. By the end of the formal statements, the Council had unanimously agreed not only to allow human development to continue, but to establish the first interspecies consciousness development program in galactic history. Zarathel spoke one final time before departing. "The Ethereal Collective offers its full support for this new direction in galactic evolution. We have spent millions of years maintaining the balance between transcendence and physical existence. Perhaps the time has come to explore what lies beyond that balance." As the formal session concluded and delegates began to file out, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The crisis that had threatened humanity's very existence had transformed into an opportunity for growth that might benefit every species in the galaxy. But, even as she celebrated, her transcendent awareness picked up something troubling at the edges of galactic consciousness, the same darkness that Captain Rodriguez had detected during the early experiments. The cosmic entities that the ethereals feared were still out there, still a threat to all organized consciousness. Matthews approached her as the chamber emptied. "Sarah, what's our next step? How do we build on this success?" We prepare, she replied, her dual consciousness allowing her to speak with both physical voice and transcendent communication simultaneously. The council crisis is resolved, but there are greater challenges ahead. The universe is larger and more dangerous than any of us imagined. The entities in the void? Among other things. But, for the first time, I'm genuinely optimistic about our chances. Humanity has proven that evolution doesn't require abandonment of identity. We've shown that synthesis is possible. Sarah looked around the chamber where so many species had come together to support a new path forward. Now we need to help others achieve the same synthesis, because we're going to need all the allies we can get. Over the following months, the galaxy entered a period of unprecedented cooperation and development. The Human Synthesis Project became a model for other species seeking to expand their consciousness while retaining their essential nature. Volunteers from dozens of worlds traveled to human research facilities to undergo modified versions of the consciousness expansion process. The results varied dramatically by species, but the successes were remarkable. The Altarians discovered that their natural affinity for temporal mechanics could be enhanced through consciousness synthesis, allowing them to perceive and navigate multiple timelines simultaneously. The Jovians found that their collective decision-making processes became incredibly efficient when enhanced by transcendent awareness. Even species that had been considered primitive by galactic standards achieved breakthroughs that astonished the scientific community. The silicon-based crystalline confederation, previously limited to extremely slow thought processes, discovered that consciousness synthesis allowed them to accelerate their awareness to match biological species while retaining their unique mineral-based perspectives. Sarah found herself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond humanity. As Director of Interspecies Consciousness Development, she worked with research teams from every major civilization to develop customized synthesis techniques that respected each species' unique nature while expanding their potential. The work was challenging, sometimes dangerous, and always profound. Each species required different approaches, different technologies, and different philosophical frameworks to achieve successful synthesis. But the fundamental principle remained constant: evolution through integration rather than abandonment. The breakthrough that changed everything came 2 years after the Council crisis, when Sarah's team achieved the first successful consciousness bridge between different species. Dr. Tanaka, now existing in pure transcendent form, managed to temporarily merge awareness with Vorthak, an Altarian researcher who had undergone their species' version of consciousness synthesis. The result was a form of understanding that bypassed language, culture, and biology entirely. For several hours, human and Altarian consciousness existed as a unified entity that could think in ways neither species could achieve alone. It's like seeing the universe through compound eyes, Dr. Tanaka reported after the link was severed. Each perspective adds depth and dimension to reality that was completely invisible before. Vorthak's response was equally amazed. The human approach to consciousness synthesis creates intuitive leaps that bypass our logical processes entirely. Combined with our temporal perception, the hybrid awareness can literally think across time. The implications were staggering. If different species could temporarily merge consciousness while retaining their individual identities, the potential for scientific advancement, artistic creation, and philosophical understanding was virtually unlimited. But it also meant something else, something that the Ethereals had been hoping for since they first intervened in galactic affairs. The consciousness network that now spanned multiple species was becoming powerful enough to address the cosmic threats that lurked in the void between galaxies. Sarah stood in her laboratory on Luna, watching streams of consciousness data flow between research facilities on hundreds of worlds. The network that had begun with a few transcended humans now included representatives from 37 species, each contributing their unique perspective to a growing collective awareness. Through her transcended consciousness, she could sense the vast spaces between galaxies, the cold regions where entities of pure negation waited for organized consciousness to spread far enough for them to begin their harvest. She could feel the ancient vigilance of the Ethereals and the other fully transcended species who had been holding these forces at bay for millions of years. But, now, for the first time, she could also sense hope. The synthesis consciousness that was spreading through the galaxy wasn't just creating new forms of individual awareness, it was building a defensive network that might finally be powerful enough to push back against the cosmic darkness. Ambassador Matthews contacted her through both physical communication systems and the consciousness network simultaneously. Sarah, we've received a priority message from the Ethereal Collective. They want to begin the next phase. Which is teaching us to fight entities that exist purely to destroy consciousness itself. Sarah felt her dual nature process the information on multiple levels simultaneously. Her physical brain experienced fear at the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Her transcended consciousness felt excitement at the possibility of protecting all life in the universe from forces that sought to reduce everything to lifeless silence. Tell them we're ready, she replied. Humanity chose evolution over extinction. Now it's time to choose protection over isolation. As the message was transmitted across the galaxy through the consciousness network that now connected hundreds of worlds, Sarah reflected on how far her species had come. They had started as biological beings trapped on a single world, dreaming of the stars. They had become something unprecedented, a synthesis of physical and transcendent consciousness that maintained their essential humanity while reaching toward infinite possibilities. The warning that the Ethereals had delivered to the Council had seemed like a threat at first, a prediction of conquest or extinction that offered no hope for alternative outcomes. But it had actually been an invitation, an opportunity for humanity to become more than they had ever imagined possible. Now, as representatives from dozens of species worked together to defend the galaxy against cosmic threats that could snuff out all consciousness forever, Sarah understood that the real test was just beginning. The Council crisis had been about proving humanity's intentions. The war that was coming would be about proving their capabilities. But, for the first time since the Ethereal's first warning, Sarah felt genuinely confident about the outcome. Humanity had found a way to evolve without losing their identity. They had shown other species how to achieve similar synthesis. Together, they were building something that had never existed before in the universe's long history, a truly unified galactic consciousness that could think, fight, and grow on a cosmic scale. The entities in the void had spent eons consuming civilizations that could only achieve transcendence or remain physical. They had never faced a galaxy full of species that had chosen synthesis, integration, and mutual defense. Sarah smiled, feeling the vast network of consciousness that now connected her to millions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Humanity had been warned to tread carefully upon the world. Instead, they had learned to walk confidently among the stars, bringing others with them toward a future that none of them could achieve alone. The universe was about to discover what happened when beings chose cooperation over conquest, synthesis over supremacy, and unity over isolation. And, for the first time in cosmic history, the forces of consciousness had a real chance of winning.